First thing I want to look at on number 1. Forget about all the stuff that they told me over here for a second. Okay? Look at the triangle that I'm given. Is there anything that I know that is for sure congruent? The one that they share in the middle. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just label that. I'm going to put a little line there because I know that that is congruent to itself. Okay, now come over here to the given parts. It says AB is congruent to CB. Okay, AB is congruent to CB. I'm going to put something on it. I'll put 2 lines there to remember it's not the same as the purple. And then it also says AD is congruent to CD. Well, I'm going to put 3 there. Okay, so now look at those 2 triangles. And before I even do the proof, why are the 2 triangles congruent? Your reason is side, angle, side, 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 angle, angle, side, angle, or HL. That's one of your reasons. Side, side, side. See, I can look at that and tell. Okay? So now, I've messed with the triangle a little bit. I understand what I'm going to be going for. Now I have to figure out how to write all this down in a proof. Okay? And really, I'm asking you for statements. Okay? So first of all, it says AB is congruent to CB. How do I know that? Given. Okay, then it says AD is congruent to CD. How do I know that? Okay, then it says BD is congruent to BD. That's the new thing that we kind of talked a little bit about yesterday, but it's called reflexive. When you're talking about sharing a side and the same thing equal to the same thing, it's called reflexive. And then you guys just told me why the 2 triangles were congruent. You told me it was side, 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 so your last reason is side, side, side. Questions? All right, the problem says RE is congruent to TE, so I wrote that in red. And it says DE is congruent to CE. I wrote that in blue. Okay, what else is congruent even though they didn't tell me? The angles across from each other.
It does tell you.
Well, it doesn't tell me that in the given. That's something I'm going to have to come up with a reason why. So what is the reason why that those 2 purple angles are congruent? They're vertical. Okay, so let's go through oh, by the way, before we go through this, what kind of thing's going to tell me that these are congruent? Side, angle, side? Okay. So, number 1. RE is congruent to TE. Given. DE is congruent to CE. Angle RED, red, is congruent to angle TEC. Vertical angles. And then triangle red is congruent to triangle tech. Okay. Questions about those 2? So before we actually do number 3, let's mark what they tell me. They tell me that DR is perpendicular, that little symbol's perpendicular to AG. And they've already marked that with that little box there telling me that there's a right angle. And then it says RA is congruent to RG. That's already marked as well. Okay. So what kind of congruence thing do we think we're going to come up with here? So we have these that are congruent. We have these angles. What else do we need to mark? What else is congruent that's not marked? How about the DR? Because they both have a DR. So it looks like it's side on the bottom, angle for the 90, and then side, side, angle, side. See that? Okay, so let's see what they said over here. So the first one, what's the reason on the first statement? Given, because that's what they already told me. Okay, angle DRA and angle DRG are right angles. How do I know that they're right angles? It's not given to us because actually what's given is that DR is perpendicular to AG. And we do see the box, but they just put that in there because DR is perpendicular to AG. So how do I know? If two lines are perpendicular, how do I know that there's a right angle there? It's a simple question. Definition of perpendicular. They told you that those two lines were perpendicular, and because the lines are perpendicular, that means there's right angles. Okay, angle DRA is congruent to angle DRG. Kind of the same. We can say definition of right angles, maybe. Alright, DR is congruent to DR. And DRA is congruent to DRG. Okay, so in the problem, they tell me about some angles being congruent. So MNP is congruent to OPN. And then MPN is congruent to OMP. Okay? So what else is congruent even though they don't tell me? Nate. What else is congruent even though they don't tell me? So the side they share is also congruent, okay? So, Luke, what do you think is going to be the reason that they're congruent, the two triangles?
Who are you talking to?
Luke. What do you think the reason is they're going to be congruent?
I just guess.
Everyone guess at it then. We got two angles, and we have a side in the middle.
Angle, side.
No.
Side.
No.
Angle, side, angle.
Angle, side, angle. Okay? Because you have to look at where they're congruent. Alright? So, number one, Caleb, what'd you get for the first reason? Given. Raven, what did you get for the second reason? Good. Haley, what'd you get for the next reason, this one? MP is congruent to MP. And Dakota, what'd you get for 4? Well, we just talked about what the answer was on number 4. And went through the whole process. Josh, what was it? Alright, number 5. So, this one's kind of weird because they tell me that N is a midpoint of A and B. If N is a midpoint, what that means is that these two sides are congruent. Because if N is in the middle, then the two things around it are congruent. It also tells me that, I can't see it right now the way that I did this, but X is on the top of A and N, is that correct? Is there an X up here and a Y here?
Yeah.
Okay. So it says AX is congruent to NY. And it also tells me that NX is congruent to BY. So it seems like I'm going to prove that the triangles are congruent by what theorem? Side, 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 since all the sides are marked. Okay. But then at the very end it says something different, and so that's what the part is that we want to talk about, okay? So, first of all, N is the midpoint of AB. So, Ben, what do you think the reason of that is? Okay. Taylor, AN is congruent to NB.
I don't know.
That's what the very first thing I told you was. Why did I tell you these two things were congruent here, AN and NB? Because it was a midpoint. So that means it's definition of midpoint. Okay. Sophia, it says AX is congruent to NY. Why do you think that is? Given. Okay. Macy, it says NX is congruent to BY. Why do you think that is? It's given. Okay, then it says that the two triangles are congruent. So Jennifer, why are the triangles congruent?
Yes. Not the reflective.
It's not reflexive. Reflexive is when you have something shared.
Vertical.
Okay.
No.
No. Why are those two triangles are congruent? That's what I was telling you just a second ago, since all the sides are marked. It's either like angle, side, angle, angle, side. It's the side, side, side. Good job. Okay, here's the last thing it tells me. Angle X is congruent to angle Y. We talked about this the other day as a reason, but I didn't ever show you how you would use it. After you get to the point that you say that the triangles are congruent, and you've said one of our reasons that we've talked about, if they say something is congruent to something based on the two triangles being congruent, the reason is C, P, C, T, C. The reason is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So once we say we have two congruent triangles, then we can say any part that we haven't talked about is also congruent. And that's called corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. I have to say that in my head. I don't have that memorized, just in case you were wondering. I say corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent in my head to know those letters. You can totally write all those out. You can say something like congruent triangles or corresponding parts if you want to abbreviate. But that's normally the notation you would see. Okay, let's talk about 6. It starts off by saying that RT is congruent to RV. And it says TS is congruent to VS. What else do we know to be true? That shared side's also congruent. Okay, so what does it look like the reason's going to be since all the sides are marked? Side, side, side. Okay, Garrett, what do you think about the first one? RT is congruent to RV. Given. Logan, TS is congruent to VS.
Given.
Haley, RS is congruent to RS.
Don't ask
Nevada,
me
the
to
triangles are
raise my hand.
congruent.
Given. Given. Sure. We'll go with that.
Lakin, why?
Side, side, side.
Side, side, side. I just told you the reason.
I'll put that for the last one.
And then the last thing says the two angles are congruent. Remember what I just told you on the previous problem? Once you have the triangles congruent, then the reason for any part of the triangles being congruent is that C, P, C, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, any questions? Okay, let's look at the last one. So it tells me that VB bisects EVO and EBO. Okay? What that means about the bisecting is that 3 and 4 are going to be congruent, and 1 and 2 are going to be congruent. Okay? If those are congruent, what else is congruent that they don't show us or tell us? The side they share. So what does it look like? Might be the reason the triangles are congruent. Angle, side, angle. Okay, now let's just figure out how to write all these reasons. So VB bisects EVO. Josh, what's the reason? Yes, you do.
Sure don't. You.
Thank you. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4, Nate. Why? It's not given.
I put definition of VB bisect. Good job.
A lot of times, like when they say something in the given, if it's in words, the reason for the statement is usually like definition of what those words are. Okay. VB bisects EBO. Caleb, what do you think?
Given.
Good. Raven, angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. It's the same reason as angle 3 was congruent to angle 4. Thank you. Haley, BV is congruent to BV. Taylor, the two triangles are congruent.
ASA.
Good. And I don't have room to write the last one where it's supposed to be, but I'll just tell you. And angle E is congruent to angle O. Is that new little thing there with all the C's? Good. Any questions?